appeared out of nowhere. There's no record of him being born here, no breeder that's a direct match. This whole thing is bizarre. They sat on her porch swing, Shadow lying at their feet, bathed in the golden light of the setting sun. They talked for hours, sharing memories of Buster, of happier times. The shared grief brought them closer, a fragile bridge forming over the chasm that had separated them. "What are we going to do, Ben?" Sarah asked, her voice heavy with exhaustion. "I feel like I'm in a dream. This shouldn't be real." "We find out the truth," Ben said, his voice filled with grim determination. "We find out who put that tag on him, who he really is, and why he looks so much like Buster. I owe it to him, and I owe it to myself." He knew that the path ahead would be long and complicated. But he also knew, looking at Sarah and Shadow, that he wasn't #039T alone. He had found a strange kind of peace in the midst of the confusion. He had a partner in this mystery, someone who understood the pain, and a shadow that had brought a glimmer of hope back into his life. They knew, deep down, that this was more than a simple lost dog story. It was a mystery entwined with their pasts, wrapped up in a silent promise to uncover the truth, no matter how painful that truth might be. Whispers in the dark. The next few days were a blur of activity. Ben stayed in Sarah's guest bedroom, using her spare bedroom as a makeshift office. They scoured Sarah and #039's town, posting flyers with Shadow and #039's picture, talking to neighbors, anyone who might have seen him before. They even visited the town and #039's old newspaper archives, searching for any mention of a missing golden retriever that might match Shadow's description, but found nothing. It was like the dog had fallen from the sky. They also started digging into Sarah and #039's past in the city. They contacted old acquaintances, former neighbors, and even a few of their mutual friends. They asked if anyone remembered anything out of the ordinary, any unusual events surrounding Buster's disappearance. Many old friends expressed their sorrow at Buster's disappearance, and sympathy for Ben and Sarah, but they revealed nothing concerning Shadow. There were the odd rumors, the what-ifs and the maybes, but nothing solid, nothing that led closer to the truth. They reviewed all the old police reports related to Buster's disappearance. The investigation had been exhaustive, with no leads. Ben had always had a gut feeling that something was off, but he was unable to articulate it at the time. He had been too consumed by grief to see past it. "Maybe it wasn't #039T an accident," Sarah said one evening, her voice filled with doubt. "Maybe someone took him," "It and #039's possible," Ben admitted, "but why? And why put Sarah and #039's tag on Shadow? Why now?" "That's the question, isn't it?" Sarah sighed, rubbing her temples. She'd taken to wearing her old glasses, the ones she'd used when she'd first joined the police force. Ben smiled fondly at her, remembering those days with a strange mixture of nostalgia and sadness. He'd forgotten how much he missed her. The local police chief, a man named Thomas, found out about Ben and #039's presence in town and seemed to be oddly curious about his investigation. He paid a visit to Sarah and #039's, asking Ben all sorts of questions about the dog. He was unnervingly persistent, particularly when asked about the tag, and seemed overly intrigued with the resemblance to Buster. Ben couldn't shake the feeling that Thomas was hiding something. After he left, Sarah, her face pale, confessed that Thomas was known around town as something of a gossip. He was a good policeman, she admitted, but was overly curious in other people's business. He loves a good mystery more than he likes a quiet night shift. Ben thought about Thomas, his overly interested questions about the dog. The way he lingered, the way he never held eye contact. Could he be involved in this? It seemed far-fetched, but Ben had learnt to trust his instincts. One evening, while Sarah was out restocking her garden supplies, Ben noticed Shadow staring intently at the backyard. He followed the dog's gaze and saw a small patch of dug-up earth near the shed. It was barely visible, covered by some overgrown bushes, but Ben had a feeling. His instincts were screaming at him. He went to the shed, found a small gardening trowel, and began digging. He found nothing at first, just loose soil, and then he felt it. The hard edge of something beneath the surface. He dug further, carefully removing the soil to reveal a small, metal box. He pulled it out, brushing off the dirt. The box was old, rusted, with a simple latch. He hesitated, a feeling of unease settling in his stomach, before opening it. Inside, he found a collection of old photographs, all of golden retrievers. Some were puppies, some were adults, but they all had one thing in common, a distinct resemblance to Buster. Some were even identical. He flipped through them, his breath catching in his throat. This was more than just a coincidence. Something sinister was going on. Beneath the photographs, he found a small, handwritten notebook. He opened it and began to read. It was a log of some kind, detailing the breeding and care of golden retrievers, each one carefully catalogued. His blood ran cold. This wasn't about a lost dog. This was a carefully constructed plot, a deliberate manipulation that had been going on for years. And he had a feeling that he was now right in the middle of it. He showed the box and the notebook to Sarah when she came back. She was equally horrified, her face a mask of disbelief. "What does this mean, Ben?" she asked, her voice trembling. "What is Project Phantom?" End quote. I don't and hashtag 039, T know yet, end quote, Ben admitted, end quote, but I intend to find out, end quote. He closed the notebook and the box, placing them carefully on the table. He looked at Shadow, who was watching them with his big, brown eyes. He felt a protectiveness towards the dog, stronger than ever. He knew, with a terrifying certainty, that they were dealing with something larger, something darker than he had ever imagined. They were no longer just looking for a lost dog. They were now hunting a phantom, a shadow that had been haunting them both for years. They had opened the door to something dangerous, and they knew they had to be ready to face what came through. The path before them was shrouded in darkness, but they knew, with the courage of two officers who had each lost something dear, that they had to follow it to the end. The genetic echo. The discovery of the metal box and the notebook transformed their investigation. The focus shifted from finding Shadow and hashtag 039's owner to unraveling the mystery of Project Phantom. They realized that Shadow wasn't and hashtag 039 just a lookalike of Buster. He was likely a product of a carefully orchestrated breeding program, designed to replicate specific traits and characteristics. They spent hours poring over the notebook, trying to decipher its coded entries. The names were mostly initials, the dates were vague and the numbers seemed to be some form of genetic tracking. It was a meticulous system, one that clearly had been developed over years. They cross-referenced the initials with records of breeders and geneticists, but came up empty. It was like the notebook belonged to someone working completely off the grid. Sarah, with her computer expertise, managed to glean some information hidden in the digital records from the hard drive of Ben's laptop. It turned out that the notebook's entries correlated with specific genetic markers. They were dealing with someone who had a deep understanding of genetics, who was using that knowledge to create dogs that were more than just pets, something that was disturbing in its implications. Someone was playing God, Ben, Sarah said, her voice tinged with disgust, end quote. This person was specifically breeding dogs. All of them, to share genetic similarities with Buster, the golden ratio, the specific eye shape, even the slight bend to the tail, end quote. End quote, but why, end quote, Ben asked, his mind reeling. End quote, why go to all this trouble, end quote. I don't know yet, she admitted, but I think it's more than just an interest in the breed. The name, Project Phantom, it's like they're trying to create something that is supposed to look but not be Buster. Ben and hashtag 039's mind raced to the implications. Was it someone obsessed with Buster, someone who couldn't and hashtag 039t accept his disappearance? Was it someone who had a more sinister motive? They realized they needed to delve deeper into the genetic aspect of the project. Sarah remembered an old colleague, a geneticist named Dr. Alan Hayes, who had worked on forensic animal cases. He had moved to a small research facility further up north some years ago. It was a long shot, but it was their best lead. They packed their bags and, with Shadow in tow, set off on another road trip. The drive was tense, each mile seeming to bring them closer to a truth that was both terrifying and heartbreaking. They didn't know who was behind Project Phantom, or what their ultimate goal was, but they knew they were dealing with a sophisticated operation, one that had gone to great lengths to remain hidden. They arrived at Dr. Hayes' facility, a sprawling complex nestled in the middle of a dense forest. The facility looked more like a fortress than a research center, with high fences and security cameras. They were greeted by a stern-looking woman, who introduced herself as Dr. Hayes and hashtag 039 assistant. Dr. Hayes is quite busy at the moment, she said, eyeing Shadow warily. You'll have to make an appointment. We're police officers, Ben said, flashing his badge.